This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups. And I have a very, very dear friend joining me today. Probably the person I've known the longest that I've ever had guest on my podcast, Kirk Bowman. Kirk, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Yeah, you just exposed our age.
Well, Kirk was 8 when we met, so he's one of these guys. It's like he's not even. I was thinking as I was walking the dog this morning about that in the movie Benjamin Buttons. You know, he's not even that. It's not like he's reverse aging. It's like he just never ages. I mean, he looks the same as he did when he was 25. So yeah. Kirk, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Educated, business school, and as a lawyer. Practiced law for a while, didn't love it, but loved the entrepreneurial businesses that I was asked to be a lawyer for. Made the switch about 20 years ago. I told myself the 90-day lie that I could both start my own business and keep my foot back in my law practice. After 90 days, I realized I couldn't do both. And the rest is history. I've never gone back. So
what was that first, like, so walk us through that for those that are kind of in the space you might have been in 20 years ago. So walk us through that mental shift that you have to go through that says, look, I just studied for 3 years. I got my law degree. I studied for the bar. I passed it. I've been practicing. I got a successful practice. I'm going to kind of scrap all this and go do something else.
Right. I was one thing that sometimes one thing that was happening to me is my daily law practice reminded me every day what I didn't like about practicing law. And so that made it easier when something came along that didn't have those things in it. I was like, oh, I'd like to jump to that because it eliminates the two things that I liked the least about practicing law. And there were more than two things that I didn't like about it, but there were two things that just like over and over. And one of those things was I didn't like the awkwardness of constantly asking clients for money, especially for them to pay for something that they didn't ask to be a part of. I got sued by somebody. They come to you, they're mad that they got sued in general. It's not like they're coming to you and saying, I want you to build me a house. I would be fine asking them for money because I'm building them a house. Saying, I need to help you fend off your business. It was a hard thing. It's like, I'm coming to this lawyer. I don't even want to be here. And now I'm going to ask him for money. So I didn't love that part. And I also noticed that if I wasn't there, the business didn't make any money. And I didn't necessarily love that either. And so it gave me a weird mental attitude around my family and my free time that we'd go snow skiing. And people would say, well, how much does it cost to go snow skiing? And I'm like, well, not only did it cost lift tickets and hotels and all those other things, but it's also costed me $200 an hour every time when I sit on this lift. And so I didn't like that feeling of knowing that. So I said, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to constantly ask my clients for money? And wouldn't it be great if my business made money, whether I was there or not?
I mean, I love that. I love that whole mentality. And I mean, it really resonates. But as you were still practicing law, you were kind of dipping your toe in the entrepreneurial space, or at least the investment space anyway. Right. So there was a transition period that kind of,
owned an office building
walked
and
through,
a hotel and a few things like that were there. There were a lot of models around that. Saw a lot of smaller practitioners that were doing that, but it kind of wasn't scratching the itch enough. Your brain in your idle time, your brain goes to what you do primarily. And to me, that's kind of a binary thing. If I'm primarily a lawyer, then my brain was there. If I'm primarily an office building owner, then my brain would be there, whatever that would be. And I think a lot of small business or entrepreneurship. And there's a discussion around that, because one thing that I've noticed, digress here for a second, one thing that I've noticed in 30 years is that there's a lot of confusion around people thinking that those two things are the same thing. Owning my own business and entrepreneurship, they're very different things. But with that said, my DNA was to be I have to focus on one thing. I'm not a good straddler. I was not a good lawyer that also owned rental houses or whatever that could be.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a good compartmentalizer. And so, much of small business and or entrepreneurship is really about learning what's in your DNA and learning how you're wired. Because if your wiring and your choices don't go the same, it'll never work.
Was there somebody that you were close to that had kind of taken this transitionary step before you? Were there other attorneys that you were friends with, in the area that had kind of thought, yeah, I'm kind of going through this, early life, crisis type thing that says maybe I need to shift into something else?
Not really anyone in particular. I do remember one time early in my in the process, I remember a friend of mine asked me to go to lunch with a guy who was a very successful business person in town, and he was trying to describe to me that the guy used to be a lawyer. I didn't know that the guy was not famous for being a lawyer, but he used to practice law in town. And he said on the phone, he said, yeah, he used to be a lawyer, but he made it over the wall. And, and kind of using that prison analogy.
Exactly.
And I don't want to be, there are a lot of good lawyers out there. There are a lot of them that love it. I'm glad there are those that love it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that moment where I'm like, oh, so other people feel the same way I do, and maybe I can make it over the wall someday. So,
well, I think it speaks really to our audience, that you're sitting in a cube
thing. That's such a first world thing.
Yeah.
The other name that we hear all the time is the golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
And you kind of end that phrase with the handcuffs, but really you can't forget about the gold, which is, what a blessing it is to be able to, go into an office and make a lot of money helping people solve problems. So, there was always a gratefulness for being able to do that. It was always a good plan B. And in the transition, I've also learned that one of the biggest costs early in the life of a new business is legal fees. And if you can do that one on your own, that opens up a lot of doors and saves you a lot of startup cash. So it's been a real blessing, just on the other side of the coin.
Right. And not just in the startup phase. I mean, I would think even in the ongoing, as things come up that are in this legal space, you're going, I think I can take care of this. So.
Right. Because there's law in everything. There's law in intellectual property. There's law in human resources. You go rent the space that you're going to, there's real estate law, like on and on and on and on and on. And you can, every facet that you touch, there's a legal element to it. And so if you can successfully, and it wasn't hard for me, this part wasn't hard for me, if you can successfully go to lawyer who's thinking about owning a business to an entrepreneur who also has a law degree, you can over lawyer yourself if you can't get out of that mode. You're always thinking about litigation. You're always playing defense. Lawyers are good at playing defense. Entrepreneurship doesn't really work defensively. Like you can't defensively start a company. You've got to go out and create and then defend later. But yeah,
it's interesting, even what you said earlier about the difference between owning a small business and being an entrepreneur. Sometimes that distinction could even be with the kind of the same football analogy. It's offensive versus defensive. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, exactly, you have to be on the offensive. You have to be proactive and willing to take risks and kind of seizing opportunity type thing, versus a small business could really just kind of hunker down and just kind of guard my my client base and produce my widget and just kind of make a good living type thing. So
I'm very involved in our startup community here in St. Louis. And that's an ongoing discussion. As a matter of fact, even one of one of my friends, wrote the book about buy then build. And there are a lot of discussions that we have around, do you want to be an entrepreneur or do you want to own your own business? Now, entrepreneurs do own their own business.
Sure.
So it's like, it's kind of a Venn diagram
right
there. But entrepreneurship, in my view, and like I said, this is an ongoing conversation, but entrepreneurship, in my view, is very 0 to 1. It starts on a napkin. It's doing something that really hasn't been done before. Like opening my own law practice, that wasn't entrepreneurial. It was, starting a small business as a lawyer, being a dentist, owning franchise businesses. I have a great deal of respect for people that do that. I don't even think I would be good at it, running Taco Bells or Sonics or things like that. There are people that are highly skilled at that and very successful at that. There's a playbook for it. And it kind of has to be in your DNA a little bit. And like I said, that's the thing that I've learned the most often is if you're going to do it, it has to be something that comes naturally to you and gives you energy. And maybe I don't want to beat a dead horse, but kind of all your type of theme. One observation I've made in my life is that it seems like we all kind of have this gas gauge type of mentality toward what we do. And we start with a full tank. And I would say most people, that needle is headed toward empty. Maybe it's 30 years. Maybe they're like, man, I'm burned out. I can't do this anymore. I can't drill another tooth. I can't do another knee surgery. I can't do another tax return. I can't cut another person's hair. I can't, draft another will or a set of estate planning documents, whatever that is. I can't sell one more thing of life insurance. My gas light is on, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of know when that burnout moment is. Some things that I saw advice out there maybe slows down the needle. Very few people get the blessing, and I've had both. I've been on both sides of this, have the blessing of having basically a sustainable, something that refills your tank. And so it's not just a matter of what can I do to slow down my journey toward burnout. Is there a way to have that needle stay in the upper half of my burnout gas gauge and never get there? And that's a tough one. It's not, it's what we're looking for, I would say, in work, but easier said than done.
So let's camp out there for just a second. So what, you've mentioned over 25, 30 years of after your transition out of law. So how do you kind of overcome that or guard against that, needle getting close to the E on your fuel tank? Because, and is it important that what you do, you're passionate about? You hear all this, chase your passion, this,
right.
You have to be passionate about or whatever. What's your take on that? I mean, and where does that come into play?
I do think that I've used this even before in this discussion with you, but I don't necessarily call it passion. I think that by the time we're adults, we're kind of pre-wired to do certain things. And I think that just like if you were in Europe, you'd have to plug into the wall with a different kind of a plug.
Sure.
I think the business pursuit, you have to keep the business pursuit in line with how you're wired.
That's
and
a
if
great
it's
analogy.
fighting against your own wiring all the time, then you're going to burn out. And if it's in conjunction with your wiring, so I don't know if I would call that passion, or I would just call that like DNA alignment. And maybe I could give you an example about me. I don't know if that would help.
Absolutely.
Maybe a sample. So I am more on the entrepreneurial side. Like I love to create the world in which I work. I don't want it to be created for me. I think there are people that are the opposite of that. I use the analogy every once in a while. I'll say, I'll get in a cocktail party conversation. And I say that all the time, realizing that I don't know that I've ever actually been to a cocktail party, but when I say cocktail party, I just mean a public, random conversation, church, basketball game, kids event at high school, whatever those things are. And you see this gleam in your eye, somebody they've been in corporate America for a long time, and you tell them what you do, and they're like, oh, they get this like kind of almost like lovey look on their face, like, man, I'd love to do what you do. And I want to give them a hug and say, man, no, you don't. That health insurance you have,
the retirement matching.
Yes, yeah. All those. And I say that with a little bit. So I do think that not enough care goes into knowing what your DNA likes. So my because I think many people would say, I'm very good at executing on this playbook. I'm not necessarily the guy who writes the playbook.
Yeah.
If you're that, then I would say, man, let's look at franchises. Let's look at Walker. Exactly. Let's look at buy then build. Let's find a playbook that's already been written, and then you can enhance that playbook. You're good at that. So one thing I get energy out of is writing the playbook. There's some difficulty that comes with that with hiring. I'm better at hiring now because I set the expectations with people. I'm like, look, we're writing this playbook. Like when you come and ask me, hey, what's your policy on the day after Thanksgiving? And do we work or do we not? And I say to you, please go write our policy on what the day after Thanksgiving should be, because I don't have one yet. It's May, and that's not on my radar screen.
Exactly.
Some people say, oh, that sounds great, but 99 out of 100 people say, what do you mean you don't have a policy for that? I've just taken a job in a company that doesn't even know what their vacation, it's so I think, knowing whether you like to work in a created world or whether you like to create your own world, that's one thing. And then within that, what I found about me, and this is a little more specific, this is very specific, and maybe back to that conversation that I was having with you about not liking to have the discussion with my clients when I was a lawyer about fee.
Yep.
I'm a B2B guy. I know that I'm not a B2C guy.
Business to business, not business to consumer.
Right. And I'm a subset of B2B. I really get energy out of joint ventures with other businesses. And here's why I think that's true. I was searching myself over the last several years for why I think that's true. I go to a business, I find a business, I make a plan where I'm able to find businesses that have an abundance of something that they're not using. I go to them and I say, you've got an abundance of X. Let me partner with you and we'll make a business out of your abundance and we'll split it 50-50. What's great about that for me, for my own wiring, is when I say 50-50, I've now had two things. One, I've had my last conversation ever with that person about price. Mm-hmm. I'm never selling them anything anymore. Right. They're never complaining about how much I'm charging, and I'm never raising my fees. I said 50-50 in the first sentence, and we'll never talk about it again. Mm. We're just going to make something together, and we're going to split the money. Conversation over. The second thing that I love about that style of B2B business, the joint venture B2B business, is we never have a conversation about a competitor. We're making a business together. They might say someday, let's not do this anymore. It's kind of binary, but they never say, man, they never look at me and say, Michael Scott, I've been buying paper from you for years, but I'm just going to have to buy it from Staples now.
No more Dunder Mifflin.
I never have to do the Dunder Mifflin dance,
exactly.
Right? So by saying, okay, I'm a B2B person, I'm a joint venture person, and all I'm asking for is access to somebody else's abundance, like it eliminates all the awkwardness for me. I never have to ask them to do anything because I'm doing all the work. I'm just making money off of my marriage with their abundance. Mm-hmm. And never have a conversation. Again, I never have a conversation about price, and I never have a conversation about a competitor. And once those things are out of the way, then to me, that's like a beautiful world to go build. I see opportunity,
Yeah.
and I don't see any awkwardness.
And
And
it seems like it's an easy sell too, because you're saying, look, we're splitting the revenue 50-50, but I'm not asking you to devote 50% of the effort, the sweat equity to
right,
make this thing work.
right,
Let me do the work.
right,
You're actually providing the market. You're
right.
providing the,
You've got foot traffic.
exactly.
Like, for instance, one of my businesses is helping, um, working with credit unions who have money to loan. They've got more money than they have loans demand. So their abundance is literally cash. They've got cash sitting in idle investments that they need to have loaned.
Right.
So they don't have to do anything. It's like, you've
Right.
already got this abundance. I'm going to show you how to do it. One of my other joint ventures is with orthopedic surgeons. They've got a certain amount of foot traffic, and a certain amount of that foot traffic needs MRI and physical therapy. So let's figure out, let's figure out how to keep those people that are already going to get an MRI scan or already going to get PT. Let's figure out how to incorporate that into your revenue stream.
And keep them in the
So,
building. Yeah.
sometimes it's something like people, like, you've got foot traffic. Let's do this with your foot traffic. Sometimes it's, your abundance is money. And then we just say, okay, now let's joint venture on this thing. So,
I mean, I love that idea of I mean, just where you in essence, you've kind of eliminated two real pain points really early in the process, where
right,
you've almost
right,
eliminated competition. You've eliminated the fact I have to ask you for money. We have to discuss terms,
right,
all the things that you've
right,
kind of nipped in the bud right there in the beginning. I think another thing is
right.
that you've almost, in some ways, it's like you've mitigated your risk too,
Mm-hmm.
early. Like, you're not
Right.
assuming all the risk on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a known commodity. The full
Right.
picture is not known, because you're in
Mm-hmm.
essence, you're kind
Right.
of reshaping this market a little bit, but the market
Mm-hmm.
exists. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
at least the traffic exists.
Right.
So you're just trying to
Right.
capitalize on that
Something
resource.
is
So
there. Something is there. Right.
exactly.
So when it comes to getting financing for it, that makes your lender or your equity partners um, feel a lot safer about it. Oh, there's already foot traffic. You don't have
Right.
to, you're not having to create that foot traffic. Oh, there's already money to loan. You're not having to, you're not having to be a bank, whatever. Those are two examples of it. and and then the end of that is, you don't have to get into that deep discussion about, what if another competitor comes along.
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
you cover that in the beginning, you cover that in your contract. By the way, this joint venture that I'm creating for you, we jointly own the intellectual property. um, you can fire me, you can't fire me for someone else.
Right.
that's
Right.
that's that's what you're giving up for this, is you can't fire me for someone else. And so then it takes a lot of those, and then I don't have to play defense. I don't have to always defend my price. I don't
Right.
have to always defend against competitors. We're making something together. And then it's the overused phrase, but it's a win-win.
Yeah.
You're creating only a win-win.
Well, it's also giving them a real opportunity to say yes pretty easily, because you
Yes.
said out of their abundance, that their untapped abundance, even, it's
Right.
just kind of their
Right.
surplus that's just sitting there.
Sure. Sure.
You're going, God, what's the risk here?
Right.
I'm
Right.
I'm going to give you another revenue stream. I'm doing all the work. I'm
Right.
literally just asking you for kind of access to, the
Something that's
people you
abundant.
have, the widgets you have in your factory type, that type of
Right.
thing. So I've,
Had
you've
a
been,
conversation this morning with a guy on personal solar panels. Same thing.
yeah,
So in one example I gave, the abundance was patient traffic or foot traffic. The other one was money to loan. The other one is top of your roof. Your abundance is, you never go up on your roof, but the sun shines up there. Let's let's
right.
let's figure out how to turn the sun shining up there into a business that we can do together.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, over the last 30 years or so, I know that you've been involved in probably 3 or 4 major projects, and maybe some minor projects along the way. So
Right.
give us just a kind of a couple of real, like, life lessons. And you've already touched on so many already, but are there
Mhm.
2
Mhm.
really key points that I mean, as listeners are thinking, okay, I want to get over the wall of my cubicle. I want to get over the wall of my
Right.
existing,
Mm-hmm.
golden
Mm-hmm.
handcuff that I see. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what are a couple things that you think are just real that you wish you would have known 30 years ago type thing, like all
Um,
those life lessons?
I think this isn't anything new, but when you take on partners, you have to be careful. Um, there is there are things that kind of um, wear down over time. I think uh, you, at least for me, I like to have at least an understanding of every single facet of the business, almost an understanding where I can do it. Let me give you an example. One of the things I tried a software technology one time. It was one of my worst business decisions. Um, the verdict is still out on whether it's a win or a loss. I guess it's a TBD, right? And one of the things that I didn't like about technology is I couldn't build the technology. I always felt I was too dependent on the engineers that were. I don't know if there's any wisdom in that or not, but it was too
We froze
crucial a
on
part
that.
of that.
The
Right? Yeah.
last 5 seconds, we had a little bit of a blip. Can you just
Right.
recap
Yeah.
that real quick?
Yeah. Um, in the technology field, I was 100% reliant on computer engineers,
Mm-hmm.
and that that didn't match with my DNA. I couldn't sit down and say, hey, if they're not going to grind out the code over the weekend, I can grind out the code over. I was 100% dependent on someone else's vision for what we were doing, and they weren't on the same page as I was, and so that was always a frustration point to me. I don't know if that, some people are better at that than others. One thing that I found interesting, I don't know if this is worth discussion about or not, but in tech, um, there are something was kind of invented over the last 10 or 12 years called the accelerator. And it's where you bring companies into a cohort, you bring mentorship, maybe dollars, knowledge of other companies, portfolio companies, and you try to take ideas and accelerate them. Two things that are interesting about that, I think. A really good accelerator will tell you, our goal is to accelerate your success or your failure. Too many entrepreneurs don't want to say this isn't working, and they find ways to slowly prolong the failure. And man, one of the most valuable commodities in your world is time. If it's not working,
Cut it
rip
off.
the band off.
Yep.
Rip the band.
Yep.
It's gonna hurt for a second. You're gonna have to tell that investor they lost their money. I know it's Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them, right? And that's it's easier said than done. But accelerating whatever is always a good idea. And the second thing that was interesting to me is by far the most successful accelerator in the world, no argument, is Y Combinator out of the San Francisco area.
Yep.
And it's interesting for me. I always think whether you're a tech company or not, everybody should go through applying for Y Combinator, because the questions they ask you make you think about, like, they ask you the questions that you should be asking yourself. Right? Every person should go through the Y Combinator application and answer their questions, because if you answer them properly, they know what increases the odds of your business succeeding. And I think it's an interesting thing, maybe something you could link and post on Rising Tide.
Yeah, exactly.
For
the notes.
For instance, one of the questions that I distinctly recall that like hit me right in the head of, oh no, that I don't have a good answer for that one, is they basically say, if you're a software company, does your chief technology officer, is that person a co-founder, and do they own at least 25% of the company? Because here's what they found. If you're the idea person with the software and you're just hiring engineers, that's not sustainable. You have to have some, the person that is touching the product every day has to be all in.
Yeah, I got to have skin in the game.
To be a co-founder, they have to have a lot of skin in the game.
Right.
So that's why they say 25%, because many companies would say, oh yeah, that person's a co-founder. I gave them 2%.
That's exactly right.
Like that's not a co-founder.
Let them park next to my car in the parking lot.
Yes, exactly. So that and many other questions really made me, so I would encourage people, whether it's Y Combinator or not, there are a lot of business competitions, grants, things like that going through those.
Mm-hmm.
St. Louis, where I live, has a fabulous one. Enter a competition sometime, not necessarily to win, but to filter through their process. It's great introspection.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea, and I think you're exactly right. And I will make sure that I'll put the link to Y Combinator, or I don't know if there are other startup, incubators that have.
Techstars is another good, and they're of course more tech oriented, but they their approach is also interesting, and it's kind of fits my DNA. It's kind of joint venture. So it may be, they may say, okay, we've got a financial technology accelerator, and we're doing that in partnership with Barclays Bank.
Right.
We've got an entertainment accelerator, and that entertainment accelerator is in partnership with Disney, et cetera. We've got a, video, we may have a sports tech, or video game tech, and it's in partnership with EA Sports, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are interesting. They're more segmented.
Well, I want to segue here just really quickly a little bit about kind of drill down on kind of your main gig right now. If you can just really kind of quickly just kind of circle the wagons here and say, okay, this is what I've landed on. This is what I'm spending the most time on right now, and this is what we're trying to kind of form. And then I want to segue right after that and talk about, if you were doing this again tomorrow, what would it look like? Type thing. So what's your day gig? Give me your elevator pitch.
Right. So back to what I said earlier, we're B2B. Our primary clients are credit unions, and they're particularly credit unions who have more money than they have loans. There is an ideal loan to deposit ratio in the credit union world. They call it loan to share. Credit unions are a unique beast in that they don't have shareholders. So they are, their members are their customers, and their members are their owners. So it's got its own ethos to it, which is very interesting to me. And within that, we target credit unions who need to loan money, and we have come up with a solution to basically get them back into a game that they used to be in a lot. So we're in a very specific business model. So we find credit unions who have who are underloaned. That's a negative way of saying it, but basically that it's not necessarily a negative business. It may be a really good credit union who's very good at creating a retail experience that's so strong that they're getting new accounts all the time, and they can't get their money loaned fast enough to make the ratios proper. A little, I guess, banking and financial institution 101. How they make their money is they bring in the deposits and they loan it back at a little higher rate. That's their basic revenue model. And within that revenue model, a credit union or a bank needs to have about 85% of their money loaned in order to be, very healthy from an operational standpoint. And so if you're looking at a public filing and they've got 60% of their money loaned, or 65% of their money loaned, or 70% of their money loaned. They're always trying to up that ratio, and our business specifically helps them with it, and more specifically helps them with it by joint venturing with local car dealers in their area in order to kind of create lending branches where the customers are, where the foot traffic is. So if somebody walks into a Honda dealer on a Saturday, they're not at the credit union, they're shopping for a car. But if the credit union can be there and the car salesperson can be there, that's the kind of experience that's better for the buyer, the car dealer, and the credit union, to put them all in the same place, rather than have it say, well, now that you've chosen your car, we'll see you Wednesday after you go back to the credit union. Like, that sales process doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah, people don't, I mean, it's kind of like the friction of buying something online. I mean, the more clicks, the higher percentage chance you're going to have of them never buying something from you. So
exactly. Right. A car dealer will tell you that it's an insane percentage. If they leave the lot without a car, your chances just of selling them that car just went down by over 90%.
Wow.
Of them ever coming back. So their incentive is for you to drive onto their lot and leave with a different car.
Exactly.
They want to crush that family truckster, like in the first Vacation movie, as you're leaving. So just what's there?
What's the alternative to them if they're underloaned, in essence? What is their alternative? Is it a money market? Is it just investing in CDs?
CDs and passive investments, too much in what they call indirect lending, things of that nature. And it kind of feeds on itself because it squeezes their excess revenue, because their yield, their average yield goes down because too much of the percentage of their portfolio is in low yield investments. Right. They then don't have enough money to do the things they want to do, which is, again, no shareholders. So they're not doing this to distribute money per share or to raise the price of their stock. Credit unions don't have stock. They want to do more things for their members and develop more members. So it's one of those things that it's banking, but in a co-op model. Mm-hmm. And the co-op will always be better if it has a bigger budget.
Yeah. Yeah, and they can loan money at lower rates. They can do a number of things. So
give back to the community. They can do education programs for people, around money, things of that nature.
Right. So Kirk, I have kind of chipped around this little mountain all episode long, and I'm really anxious to hear you, kind of put on your professor hat, sick 'em bears, and talk about if you were going to do this tomorrow. What would you do specifically? And, give us a couple of little foundational steps that, people that are, like we said earlier, trying to get over the wall or thinking about, scaling the wall. What are 2 or 3 things that you just got to do that are foundational that you would start tomorrow, that you would kind of lay that foundation of that runway of exit?
Mm-hmm. Right. I really think it's much more introspective than it is looking outward. The mistake that I see people make is they say, I've got to do more research. I've got to look for the right thing. And they're looking out here and they're not saying what works for me. How am I wired? What does my spouse think? What stage of life are my kids in? And it's, I would say, if I was, somebody said, hey, I'm thinking about buying a business. Do you want to hear about the business I'm thinking about buying? And I get this all the time. People like, hey, can I grab you for coffee sometime? I hear a lot of small business people complain about that, the pick your brain phone call. I love the pick your brain phone call. I've made very good friends in the pick your brain phone call. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I've done, this isn't really what you asked me, but one of the ways I use my law degree to communicate in the startup community in my town is it's very well known that if you're a small business person and you're in our community, I will help fix your speeding tickets for free. It makes people give me that awkward phone call. Hey, Kirk, remember that time you said you'd fix my speeding ticket for free? So I was going to Walmart the other night and I, rolled through a stop sign and blah, 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 and that kind of intimacy helps me get to know people better. I call them back, it's a good thing. All that to say that if you had coffee with me and said, hey, I'm thinking about buying a business where I, clean swimming pools and treat swimming pools. Let me tell you about their ROI. Let me tell you about their history, blah, blah, blah. I would say, stop right there. Are you married or are you single? How many kids do you have? What are their ages? Where have you been? I would dig deeper into what is it that you like about your 20-year job that you've had at KPMG? What is it that you don't like about your 20-year job? I would turn the camera around and say, and I do that all the time. Let's talk about you. Then the questions that we would need to ask about the pool business will be answered before we get to the pool business. So my number one piece of advice to people is they're pointing the camera at the business and they need to turn the camera around and really do a lot of self-searching and life situational searching. Like what if you need to move? What if this takes off and you need to move? They'd be like, oh, well, I can't really, my dad has Parkinson's. Like, okay, let's, that's an answer to a question. Let's start talking about your personal situation. And then you get a lot more focus when it comes to evaluating the business opportunity or the transition from where you are to where you're going. It's much more about you than it is about the opportunity.
I love that. Is there kind of a hypothetical Venn diagram that you have in mind when you're flipping that camera and pointing it back at yourself? I mean, you've heard all the entrepreneurs, they have to, is there a market? Will people pay for it? And is it something you can do? Is it your skill set? Is there somebody that will, buy it, that type of thing? Is there, what would be the circles of the Venn diagram when you're flipping that camera to yourself?
Right. Yeah. That's a good question. Maybe I would visualize it slightly as more of a flow chart than as a Venn diagram. And so you have to properly order the yes, no's.
Right.
Yes, no.
Like a decision tree.
Yes, no. Almost, decision tree. Right. And I think the first one is entrepreneur or business owner. I said that one earlier in the thing. Are you more wired to execute a playbook that's already written? Or are you more wired to, do you want to write your own playbook?
Right.
And then I would start from there. And then that gives you new decision trees, because that's such a big one, because that's how you begin. The opportunities that you start looking for are completely different depending on the answer to that question.
Yep.
So, and then I would start down that road. Now I would have less advice for someone who answers, I just want to own my own business. I'm really good. I'm a master ninja executor on somebody else's playbook. And that's many people. Those are the people that thrive in an organization. That's not me. So I'm less experienced in that branch of the decision tree. But what I would do then is I would say, let me find you somebody that's good in that branch of the decision tree, because I've run across that person, and you ought to go talk to them.
Or they've already done it. Or like you said, kind of the franchise model, the existing, acquiring another business type thing. So
then, and if it's the other side, if it's entrepreneurial, then you get into the questions about how you're wired and making sure it matches up with the plug of your wiring. Like I said, I think the passion thing is maybe a little bit overused, but it can start with that. What are the things that you, I kind of tried to discover what that is. Asking people what they're passionate about is always a little weird. I'll say, last time you were in an airport, and you wanted to just read a magazine on the airplane, like which magazine did you grab? um, um, my lessons from law, my evidence professor in law school, worst grade I made in law school. Don't tell my parents. I may not share this podcast with them.
That's right.
I made a D in evidence, so
but
it made a big impact on me, right?
That's right.
I think it was a mercy D. I think the professor didn't want me to have to take his class again because he was the only one that taught it. So he's like, I need to give this guy an F, but I don't want to see him anymore. So when he would question in the what they call in Texas voir dire, what they call everywhere else voir dire, when they're questioning the jury and picking the jury, he would always ask lots of standard questions. It would take a few hours. His questions, and this was, please put this in the context of the 1990s or even the late 80s. His questions were, do you have any bumper stickers on your car? And what are they? And do you have any tapes or CDs in your car? What kind of music do you listen to? So you might say in today's context, do you have any tattoos and what's on your Spotify playlist? Maybe that's
Can I see your Facebook profile?
But still bumper stickers, right?
Yeah.
And those things like tell people where their idle brain goes.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a way to match that up, then you're getting, maybe that's passion, maybe it's just where you're wired.
The term you used earlier may be better. I mean, alignment may be a much better term.
Mm-hmm.
I love the kind of the plug in the wall analogy, but European plug versus U.S. plug type thing. So I love that.
It's a DNA alignment. So I would say that's the way it is, and that's not easy. Like sometimes it takes a couple of business cycles to be like, oh, this is the thing. Otherwise, you may be good at it. You've probably seen those diagrams. I remember the first time I saw it, I've seen it in a few places. The first time I saw it, I saw Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great.
Mm-hmm.
He just had an easel one time at a meeting that I went to, and he did the 3 circles. This is a circle of things you're good at. This is a circle of things that you love to do. Oddly enough, I know a lot of people where that's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. They're very good at something. They're a good surgeon, don't love it anymore.
Yep.
They're good dentist, good lawyer, don't love it anymore. Good carpenter, whatever. Find the thing you're good at, find the thing you love to do. And then the 3rd circle is money. Does it make money?
Mm-hmm.
I may be a good guitar player and I may love guitar, but am I in the right band? Is it hard to make a living as a musician? Those kind of things. And some people are better at that than others. And, there's kind of a quest. Very few of us get to work at the intersection of those 3 things. And sometimes that's a different way of describing DNA alignment or, what you're aligned.
Right.
Because ultimately, if you're not in that circle, that gas gauge is moving toward empty at some speed.
Yep.
Maybe it's slow speed, maybe it's not slow speed. And that's a tough one because even people that are passionate and good at it, I'll tell you an example that I see all the time, and I hate is I see my parents were both. My dad's a school administrator, was a school administrator, retired. My mom's a retired school teacher. Like you see teachers get toward the end of that 30-year thing, and they're ready to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
They loved it.
Absolutely.
They reflect on it, but that gauge was moving toward empty pretty quick at the end.
Exactly.
And that gas light came on, and somebody needs a breather, and sometimes it's just a breather, but sometimes it's something that, so hopefully you find something sustainable. It took me a couple of tries, not necessarily failures, to find what I love and what I don't love, and also what I'm good at. And it's a very narrow slice of the B2B world.
Right. I love the way you kind of wrapped up our chat today, the whole idea. And I think if there is a, kind of a key takeaway, it really is, for those that are listening to, to kind of look at that Venn diagram that you just described, that Jim Collins described, that, what are you good at?
What do you
What
love?
is the market asking for, type thing? And,
Right.
will they pay for it? And
Right.
what do you really love to do? Or what
Mm-hmm.
are those passions aligned? Because, where those intersect is exactly what is the sustaining factor,
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
stress is high, when
Mm-hmm.
fatigue is high, when repetitive, you know practice is high, all the things that are going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of drain your tank, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But Kirk,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really just appreciate the time you took today, and just I've loved the chat we've had,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've loved watching your journey for, both up close and from a distance over the last 25 or
Mm-hmm.
30 years. And I'm really excited about this new venture you've got going. And
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of had a little bit of a backseat view
Oh,
of,
right. Right.
some
Yeah.
of the things that you've
That's
done, and
good.
just and I've learned so much from you,
Mm-hmm.
even today, just listening to your story. And just
Mm-hmm.
thanks for sharing your startup story,
Oh, right. Right. Yeah.
with
Thanks.
Rising
Yeah.
Tide. And but man, I just really appreciate you, and the things that the experiences we've shared together, and just having the time to talk to you today. And just thanks
Mm-hmm.
for sharing your time and your experience and your thoughts and your ideas and strategies, and just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Kirk, thanks again.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Talk to you soon.